Good. So we should get started, maybe? Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining. This is our first official Trials at Home Interest Network webinar. And today we'll focus on operational learnings that came out of the RADIAL trial. Before we get started, on the next slide, just some practicalities. First off, you can see here, probably some familiar faces, and a lot of people that were very much involved with the Trials at Home project throughout the course of the project. I'll let people introduce themselves as they take the lead for their topic. But a quick list of our presenters. And then on the next, let's take a look at what we'll talk about today. So a quick intro to the webinar, and I'll hand it off to Megan, who will give us a reminder about what the RADIAL trial was. Mira will give us an overview of some of the operational learnings. Stan will talk to some extent about the technology and some of the learnings there. And then Amos will give us an overview of the quality and safety findings. And we'll end with an open session of Q&A. So feel free to jump in and ask some questions. On the next slide, this is practically how you can do that. So the chat is actually disabled. So you'll have to use the Q&A in the meeting controls. As you see questions being posted, you can upvote those that you want to see most likely to be answered. So those rise to the top. You can also switch between the questions and the comments, so we can have a running discussion that's starting, but you can also post separate comments, and then those can also be filtered and sorted. So no open chat, but please feel free to post your questions, start a discussion thread. We definitely want to hear your feedback. If we move on to the next slide, just a quick reminder about the Trials at Home Interest Network. This is definitely meant to be a bit of a continuation of the Trials at Home project, in the sense that we wanted to keep a group together that could continue to exchange on best practices, on learnings, on new policies, to both learn from each other and also potentially identify any gaps that still exist, and even think about how we could try to fill some of those gaps. So it's really meant to be a network where we can continue to discuss decentralized clinical trials and continue to advance the field of DCTs. And then on the next slide, this is not meant to be an all-inclusive list. This is really a list of areas where we think we could go, certainly open to comment and different ideas and thoughts, but we have committed to running a series of webinars throughout the year. This is the first one, and we will have 2 additional webinars over the course of the year. We will have network meetings where we can share best practices. Some ideas are also to think about things like legislation, like Act EU. Where can we share or even have some feedback into those draft guidelines? And then there could be some future opportunities to even secure some funding and create some focused work streams, depending on the exact gaps that are identified, and any folks who want to get involved with driving any of that. So again, very open to ideas and thoughts. And as a quick reminder, if you have interest or you have colleagues that you know that are interested in joining the network, here's the link to be able to sign up. And I will then turn it over to Megan to give us a quick reminder about the RADIAL trial. And over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Kim. So good afternoon, good morning, everybody. I'm Megan Heath. I was the FPA lead for the RADIAL work package, working hand in hand with Mira, who will speak in a minute or two. But just to give you a very high-level reminder of what RADIAL was, it was one of the work packages within the Trials at Home IMI project. It was bedded in the centre and was our proof of concept study in terms of defining and looking at what were the KPIs or drivers or benefits and impact of decentralized activities in a clinical trial. So take the next slide. So and just click through to the build, please. Thank you. So as you know, there were several work packages. RADIAL was approved as a low intervention phase 4 study in people with diabetes mellitus type 2, with the objective of assessing the impact of decentralized elements in clinical trials. The study was designed around 3 arms as a methodological study. We had a conventional arm, a hybrid arm, and a fully remote arm, which had not been done before in Europe. The KPIs were the main outcome measures. So we assessed recruitment, retention, participant and site satisfaction, but we also looked at the acceptability of data in terms of safety reporting, oversight by the PI, data quality, and treatment adherence of the patients. So if I take the next slide, please. So within the study, we incorporated several decentralized elements, all of which you can see on this slide. Some of them, as I said before, were being implemented for the first time across Europe, which gave us a wealth of learning opportunity and a wealth of challenges as well, which we faced as a group, but lots of opportunity to expand and take learnings forward. The study, as you can see from the next slide, was conducted in 6 European countries. We recruited a total of 108 participants. 47 of those participants were in the conventional arm, with patients visiting the traditional site for all of their recruitment, IMP dispense, and their assessments. We had 53 recruited in the hybrid arm, where recruitment was still in the conventional mode, and the patients were randomized within the Part A arm between conventional and hybrid. But we also utilised home nursing and telemedicine for some of the assessments with the hybrid patients, so subtly different from the conventional arm, but probably closer to where we are today in our current clinical trial design. And then the last part was the fully remote part. And due to a number of constraints, which I'm sure Mira will touch on, we only recruited 8 in that remote arm. But in that arm, the participants were not known to the sites. They were consented fully remotely. They never attended site as part of their clinical trial participation. So very much at the frontier of doing something very different for clinical trial ecosystem in Europe. So with that, it's a very sharp, short overview just to frame where Mira is going to target some of the learnings, and I'll hand over to Mira to share those with you.
Thank you so much, Megan. Hi everyone, I'm Mira Zuidgeest from the University Medical Center in Utrecht, and I was the academic lead for Trials at Home. Really happy to be together presenting these in-depth learnings on the RADIAL trial. I think what Megan has shown already makes clear that we had a lot of operational learnings on RADIAL, trying out all these different decentralized elements in these different countries. And in the next slide, you can see that we think those operational learnings are just as important as the scientific outcomes of the trial, because if we want to move towards using decentralized elements, we need to know how to do that well operationally. So we wrote a paper series on that together within Trials at Home, where we try and share those learnings as much as we can with the broader community. 6 papers, you can find all of them here. But you can also imagine I had a hard time picking some operational learnings for today, given that I have 10 minutes. So basically, Stan is going to talk more about the technological findings. So I thought it's good to talk a little bit about the consenting, remote consenting specifically within RADIAL, the supply of IMP, and also touch upon the site experiences, which are really preliminary data still, but I think it's worthwhile to share it here. All the rest, if you want to read more, have a look at these papers. As Megan already said, we recruited not that many participants in the remote arm. That's explained in a lot more detail in the recruiting and consenting paper. Several reasons, including choosing only one site per country, including that at first you had to switch IMP to be able to participate, etc. But still the learnings are very valid. So moving to the next slide, looking into consent for part B. So remember, it's a small group, but in that group we did do remote e-consent with e-identification, which in the end led to a qualified electronic signature. And I realize I don't have to control, so I have to say next quite a bit here. But how did we do that? So if you look at the next bit, we first informed participants through a dedicated study app. We provided information in different ways, so they could watch a video, they could quiz themselves, they could read the materials, partly online, partly in a document. And if people were then still willing to proceed, the next step would be, if you click again, that they had a consultation with a site. So yes, people were fully remote, but they still had live contact with sites. They could ask any questions they had about the trial here and discuss. And if they still wanted to continue, then the next step was that they would first do remote identification, after that sign in and download the consent form. So some of the things that were quite challenging here is that how did we do that online identification? We had interactions with the regulators very early on. There's another paper on that. And one of the questions there was, how do you make sure that the participants are the correct ones? So in the end, we implemented e-identification. So people had to use specific documentation, just like you do with banking, basically. They had to connect that to the phone. They had to make a selfie. I tried it. It's not very easy. And what we found out is that even one of our PIs, for example, did not have the right documents to be able to do that. It wasn't that easy always for the participants. And so I think here a definite learning is, how can we do identification remotely without going over and above what we would do in normal clinical trials, where we also do not scan the documentation for correctness. So I think that's still an ongoing discussion, but that was an important learning. I think another learning, and maybe if you go to the next, then you see some of the recommendations that came out of this. Another thing was that we saw that the informed consent requirements were still quite different across countries. So we had to have different tick boxes, different number of signatures, which is much easier actually on a paper consent than if you have to program that in to your e-consent. So again, if we could get there some standardization, that would be really helpful. As I already mentioned, that not everyone may have the documentation to do e-identification. That means also that that you may have problems with equitability. Some people may be able to do this, others not. So that's an important learning. Important learning is that you need to then, that stems from that, develop backup procedures for e-consent. So you need to have an alternative way to do consent if that way we programmed it did not work. We had that backup through paper consent. And it's good to invest in comprehensive training for site staff so that they can help participants through the process there. So those were some of the learnings on e-consent, remote e-consent with e-identification, I have to say. We have to be very specific. Very often we use terms, but we actually use them slightly different. So next part, DTP IMP delivery in RADIAL. Again, we really needed to apply a tailored approach here. We, as Megan already explained, we did this trial in 6 countries. And in the end, part A was conventional, so the medication would be at site, would be given to the participants. But for Part B, where people were fully remote, we had to set up 2 different routes. For some of the countries, we could ship from a central pharmacy in one country to a participant in another country. But for some of the countries, the requirement was actually that the depot had to be within their own country. So we would have to ship first to that country and then from that country to the participant. So there's different models you can use for DTP-IMP. We had a lot of conversations, again, also with local regulators on what we were planning to do. And if you click again, there was some research led by Amos, who will be speaking later on, about what are the different ways you can do direct-to-participant shipment of IMP. And what we figured out is that we need to be very clear on what we are talking about. There's 4 models that you can use with different acceptance in different countries. So you can either go from site through courier to participant, which is basically accepted everywhere, central pharmacy to courier to participant, depending on where the central pharmacy is located. Sponsor courier participant, we did not do that in Radial, and we got quite some pushback on that, where we realized we had miscommunication. And then the other one is from local pharmacy to courier to participant. Again, not something we did within Radial. If we can go to the next slide. So DTP-IMP sounds easy. The protocol was approved in CTIS based on our general description, but then the devil is in the detail. So next to the points are already discussed, it's national legislations influencing that, who actually has the jurisdiction to decide on what is allowed and what not, which may be different in federated systems like Spain and Germany than in other countries. You need to think about data privacy, participant identification, etc. So there's a lot of things you need to think about if you want to do this well in different countries. But it is possible. So we did in the end do that in all of these 6 countries. And the learnings again are in one of the papers. Last slide, very shortly, as I mentioned, it's still preliminary findings, but we were very interested, of course, in how do sites experience using decentralized elements. So we both had surveys for site staff at fixed time points within the Radial trial as one of the KPI outcomes, and then also did in-depth interviews with a lot of these sites after the trial had finished. And we're still looking into the learnings in more detail, but some of the key observations that we already have is that we saw that site satisfaction decreased during the trial. Most mentioned reason there was an issue with one of the technologies that they found really hard to deal with. But importantly, interviewees also recognized the learning curve. So there were people actually saying, okay, this was really tough, but now I'm ready for the next one. And I think that's really important. So what would they really have wanted? So they would want hands-on live demonstrations and test systems for device users and app navigation, and we did not have that. We showed it to them, but they couldn't play around with it themselves. So that's definitely a learning for us. And they emphasize the responsive and knowledgeable help desk is crucial. And I think Sten is going to talk about that. So I think this is a very nice bridge to the second part of the next part of this webinar, which is on the tech learnings within Radial. I think for the sites, one additional point to make is that we need to think about how we reimburse sites for site activities that are decentralized. So we are used to a visit-based reimbursement, and this was one of the things we found next to the digital parts that I already mentioned. So with that, I want to hand over to Sten.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, hello, I'm Sten. Glad to present here. Thanks for the invite, and also happy to see such a huge audience and so many familiar faces. I had the pleasure to lead the technology work package from scientific point of view in my former role as an associate professor at FIU and NEOM. Now I am working for European Research Infrastructure on Biobanking. And hope with the European Health Data Space to touch back on clinical trial data at some point. Next slide, please. As a first slide, I want to show you our chosen high-level architecture, which was basically circled around the central platform, where we implemented many digital components to realize these DCT elements, which have been introduced earlier. And some third-party components, which you see partially around the system, we integrated or partially integrated, like I will present in a later stage. For this, we had an intensive call or review of technology out there to be integrated. And this was actually also part of the story, what we wanted to achieve in trials. So we didn't want to go for a platform which provides all the DCT element. It was in our interest, research interest, to integrate parts of the technologies, which is of course also was from the beginning a potential source of problems. But the advantage, of course, in this approach is that you can more be flexible to your trial which you want to run. At the end, this overview, this architecture has been chosen to have the best of both worlds, so to say, to minimize a bit the integration complexity, to have a unified central repository for participants onboarding and also trial data, of course, to have also a bit of distributed risk management in this, to manage the different components also individually, and have the centralized orchestration in general. More about this is written in this one paper, which I also referenced here. Next slide, please. Just before, I was saying that we integrated some of the technologies, but also we not integrated part of them, and we partially integrated some. The overview you can see here. And the reason, of course, why we only partially or not integrated parts is, of course, due to the complexity of integration of technology in other technology, and of course, the problems related to this. We will see later that, of course, with interoperability, with standards and so on, it could make our life a bit easier. But I think in general, we are not there yet. What we integrated is a glucometer in our central app, what we provided, and the e-consent we partially linked through our software to a third-party telemedicine component with a single sign-on. Then we had, of course, in the lab managing barcode over barcode the products, and the recruitment, of course, like we have also seen a bit before, we did our external landing page matching to our central platform. RTSM shipping and home nursing has not been integrated in our platform and involved, of course, manual entry by staff partially, which is in theory also a lack of problems or of data transforming problems. But of course, you need always to keep the balance between integration efforts and where it's necessary. Next slide, please. Like we have seen also earlier, and of course I cannot touch on all the problems we had technology-wise, but the most issues were related exactly to these integration parts, what we have seen, and especially as we did for the remote arm mobile phone use and devices which the participants should use alone at home in a home environment. And of course, especially there, usability and tech integration must be very straightforward and very safe, that people, participants in trials can manage the technology. We had here in Trials at Home quite some problems because of varying smartphone models and operating system versions. Of course, our third-party components which we used, like the insulin injection cap, had also blacklist of phones which were not supported, but also, of course, our software and so on was also not keen with all the models. And this is something definitely we should have better controlled. Bluetooth connection, we probably know it all ourselves, especially if there are already existing Bluetooth connections to devices on the phones of the participants, and we introduced other connections to devices, is also problematic, especially if you're not controlling the hardware and the software. The smart injection cap I was speaking about already, we had some connection problems there. And all these device issues generated the highest volume of tickets, what you will see also later. What we did in the in the trial at the end, we implemented in our web portal some manual entry of data, which is from interoperability point of view, of course, not the best thing, because there also the participant need to take action himself or herself. We provided video-based troubleshooting from our help desk, which was not planned from the beginning. We'll say a bit more on a later slide. And of course, we also implemented during the project some more server-side diagnostics to understand why technology was behaving like technology was behaving. To summarize on these specific technical problems, it is recommended, of course, to define more strictly the hardware and software specs for the study apps, similar related to like issues, so to say, or requirements when you onboard participants. Then a more diverse field testing. Related also to the last point here, it is also recommended, I think it's also done partially already, to have a pre-enrollment phase where you collect data with your devices and see if the data quality is fitting and if participants can handle the devices before you onboard them in the study. Server-side login, I talked already about it, to better troubleshoot. Be agile in your implementation process, which of course is not always possible, especially if you have third-party software components, to update also workflows like manual entry. We had the possibility and it worked quite successful, or was a game changer, let's say. And then, of course, hybrid provisioning, what is already done in some studies where you check the specs of the technology, and if it's not good enough, you provide technology to the user, which of course is a cost issue, and also provides the dual device use burden, meaning that it can be that participants have then 2 phones, for example, and leave the study phone only on their night desk at home, which can also for some study maybe not the ideal solution, especially if you want to interact with the participant. Next slide, please. Like already touched on, we provided also a technology support system, meaning kind of an extended help desk where we tracked several statistics of tickets and tickets usage, issues, and so on. There has been a separate paper on these technology support system recently published. What is important here, we also provided this kind of knowledge base, meaning a Wikipedia page where we tried to provide for all the participants, but also CRAs and sites, information how to tackle certain issues, technology-wise, but also otherwise with videos. And we also, during the study, if we saw that certain issues arise more often, we provided more information on these specific issues. And then, like I said before, during the study, we established the live support, where we basically on demand, when participants were on the sites, were available for a callback in all the languages which were where RADIAL took place, and of course only during office hours. And to remind you, this trial has not performed by a company or by a pharma company, but by a consortium of people from different organizations, and it was quite a success to see this be implemented. Next slide, please. Next slide. Sorry, yeah. Very short for the whole process. Like I said, and there's more to be said if I would have more time on the technology selection. We had several calls and several committees selecting the technology based on different quality criteria to make the best fit for implementing our digital elements. Here you can see how many vendor submissions we had and how many we selected. We did to due to our best knowledge, UAT, where we tested different components and also end-to-end workflows. But like I said, some parts we probably missed. I presented them in the slides earlier. We had what was quite successful also during the trial, quite a close governance, where we on a weekly basis checked issues, bug fixes, and hot fixes and other issues, and could also relatively fast react on them. And had also, like I said before, or showed before, quite a good monitoring about issues based on our tickets, and could also react here in near time to provide better information and better information to all participants in the slide in the trial. Next slide, please. So to summarize, some key lessons learned. Interoperability is quite a fancy word, I would say. It's also hardly achieved, especially if you go for different kind of technologies. In my point of view, there's technical-wise still a lot to do. Some standards also missing. What we also learned, I would say, is that, of course, you can relatively with lower efforts integrate technology, but as most of the technology is tested individually in other trials potentially before, the integration is not always aiming to a product or to a combination which is then without failures. So you need to be aware of that these things can happen. The modular approach I talked about already in the architecture. Of course, you need to in your selection of technology make sure that they provide the certain experience and also testing or validation of the technology in trials before. Use integration selectively. Again, several times I tackled here already. You need to see in your architecture where integration is helpful for the data process, for the data quality, for the user experience, and where it is better to have manual interaction because it doesn't wait out the integration efforts and the risk, of course, of errors here. Bring your own device. I think it has a back and forth to decide here. The dual use problem I spoke about, but if in the moment, of course, you control the devices and you give out devices, you have, of course, better control on the issues. Notifications, interaction with the participants, which should handle the technology alone in their home environment is very important. And then the thing I talked about earlier, the cross-functional support in the study, not only by ticketing, but also providing information source and monitoring issues which appear in the study and requests. Next slide, please. Conclusion, I think radio was for me a very interesting experience. I come from academia. Sometimes I would wish for more integrated technology, but practical side shows that we are maybe in some issues not there yet, that technology works maybe independently, but in integration you have other problems. Still, like I said, I would wish for the future that we have, of course, better tailored technology setups and not need to go for one platform which provide everything. The architecture we spoke was because of the central hub, gave us some kind of control still over the technical setup. Bring your own device, I talked already several times. Important at the end, and we can be critical if we are there yet or not. Decentralization should not the shift of burden to the participants or to the CRAs. It is more a question to the trial providers, to the technology providers, and the technology support system. Please read the separated paper here. Was, I think, a very good success team-wise, but also for the project itself. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Sten. And I will continue. So my name is Amos de Jong, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University Medical Center in Utrecht. So you have learned a lot about the background and the theory of decentralized clinical trials, but what is now really the impact of decentralized clinical trial approaches on, for example, the quality and safety in a clinical trial? So I will talk a bit about the results of the RADIAL study in this short presentation, and I will focus on the safety and quality outcomes. So these are first the availability of treatment adherence data. So that is the insulin that was used, the time to adverse event reporting, missing data, and also the query rates. And these outcomes, or key performance indicators, as we call them, were studied also in RADIAL to really see, okay, what is the operational and scientific quality of these trial designs. So a small disclaimer before I show you some results is that we are really wrapping up the final analysis now and hope to also publish this shortly. But the results I will share today should be also viewed as preliminary. Today I will focus on three outcomes regarding safety and quality, and that is availability of adherence data, time to adverse event reporting, and missing data. But before I do so, I would like to shortly walk you through this flow chart. As already mentioned before, within part A, so that is site-based recruitment, 100 participants were randomized to either the conventional arm, which is 47, and the hybrid arm. And for the part B, so that is the remote or decentralized recruitment pathway, we eventually enrolled 8 participants. And important to mention that although some participants discontinued the study throughout, the data for the key performance indicators that I will show is all included up to the point that the participants are in the study. So all the data that has been collected has been included in the analysis. So some key participant characteristics that are, I think, important to show. And of course, there's way more, and that will also be published later on. But some key characteristics include the following. So overall, we found that about 31% of the participants reported female sex. There was a median age of 64 years old, which was comparable across the arms, I would say. And of course, important to mention here is that the remote arm only includes 8 participants. And then also interestingly, the distance from the site to participants' homes is very comparable in the conventional and hybrid arm that used conventional recruitment methods. And we see that the participants live relatively close to the investigative sites. But then if we look at the remote site, for example, we see that also this really allowed for some participants who live further from the investigative site to also participate in this study. So if you then move to the outcomes, I would like to start with the treatment adherence data. So we defined the outcome as the percentage of days with documented intake of the study drug. And important to mention here that in both the hybrid and the remote arm, this adherence data was collected using a smart cap that was attached to the insulin pen, and that was that used Bluetooth to also transfer the data to the study app. But participants were also allowed to manually collect the data. And what is of interest, and that was also already shortly discussed by Sten, is that there were some issues with this technology. So only 25% of the data that was collected for the hybrid and remote arm was actually electronically created by the smart cap, and the rest was manually entered by the study participants. And in the conventional arm, the participants were only allowed to collect this data manually. So an acceptability threshold of 80% was defined beforehand. So 80% of the availability of treatment adherence data was considered acceptable, and this was based on a previous study that also evaluated the same medicine. And then in this figure, you can see the documented treatment data over time. So you see the treatment weeks or the follow-up weeks on the x-axis, and there you see the week 1 to 24. And in red, you see the conventional arm, and in blue, you see the remote and the hybrid arm that use the same way of collecting this adherence data. And you see that overall, it is, the availability is just below 80% available also over time. It's quite stable actually over time. So that's quite interesting. And of course, I think important to mention is that with insulin, we expect at least close to 100% adherence, but this really talks to the availability of that drug intake data in the context of this study. So if we then move to the time from adverse event occurrence until reporting, this is of course an important measure also relevant for safety monitoring in a clinical trial. I think it's important to mention that in the hybrid and remote arms, participants were allowed to also self-report adverse events using the study app. And in the conventional arm, as in the hybrid and remote arms, participants could mention their adverse events to the investigator. So it was investigator-solicited adverse events, and the investigators then reported this to the ECRF. And in this figure, you see the difference between investigator-reported and self-reported adverse events, or the time to adverse event reporting from occurrence. Important to mention is that we defined an acceptability threshold of 28 days, which is the interval between two visits in this study. And what you can see on the right is that for all self-reported adverse events, they were within the acceptability threshold of 28 days, and they were reported with a median of 1 day, actually. And for the investigator-reported adverse events, we see that there's a broader spread, and the median here was 20 days from occurrence until adverse event reporting. So an important difference, and it also shows that self-reporting may be considered as an additional measure to also collect adverse event data. In terms of severity of the adverse events that were reported, I think it is difficult to see very clear trends, but we saw, for example, for those adverse events that were self-reported, which is 20 in total, that we also were able to capture some severe adverse events, or they had a severe severity score of severe. Should not be interpreted as serious adverse events, of course. But for the mild and moderate events, I think it is relatively comparable. We see, if we look at the treatment given for the event, we see that it is slightly less for the investigator-reported adverse events in the hybrid and remote arm, which is also an interesting finding. But overall, important to see that all adverse events that were self-reported were within 28 days, and actually a median of 1 day. So it really can reduce the time from occurrence until reporting. If we then move to the last outcome that I would like to discuss with you today, it is about missing data. Here in this table, you see the proportion of data that is available compared to what was or what was expected, and that is then corrected for dropout over time. You see different data points that were also collected via different means. So, for example, you see the HbA1c, which was also analyzed in a central lab, the electronic patient-reported outcomes, which was used the study app to collect participant satisfaction data, and that was through the study app in all arms. And you see fasting plasma glucose, which was also measured using a Bluetooth connected device. So, and also in all arms, this was collected using that device. So what you can appreciate is that for the HbA1c and also the electronic patient-reported outcomes, that data was quite complete. But for the fasting glucose, there were also some issues here with the device, and that also shows larger proportion of missing data. And if you then look at the fasting glucose availability over time, for example, in this graph, you see for all study arms pooled the days with registered fasting glucose data available, and that ranges from 0 days in red until 7 days per week. So for each day is one record in pink. You see that over time, we see a larger proportion of participants with no fasting glucose data registered over time. So to wrap up this presentation, some take-home messages or conclusions based on this on the RADIAL trial. The RADIAL trial results show that decentralized elements can be safely implemented in diabetes mellitus trials. Remote participant monitoring using mobile applications, such as the study app that we implemented, reduces the time between adverse event occurrence and reporting, and can also be used to complement investigator solicitation. And technology should be extensively tested, and mitigation strategies should be in place to really limit the missing data that was also observed in this study. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and let's continue with the question and answer. So I will give back the words to Kim. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So I think that concludes our presentation portion of the hour we have together. So happy to take any questions, comments from anyone in the crowd. Again, the chat is not enabled, but you can post through the Q&A. I do not see any questions right now. I'm happy to get things started. Or I see Mira, if you have a pressing question, feel free to jump in.
No, I see quite a few questions in the Q&A.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
maybe there's so maybe we can start with those, because there's quite a few that are there. Sometimes they don't load, so that could be the case.
I'm just refreshed and I see them. Thank you very, very much. Yeah. So I guess the first question is really commenting on the sample size across the different groups, and specifically the smaller number of patients that were enrolled in the remote component. I don't think anyone has answered this online yet, so maybe I'll turn that to Megan and Mira to maybe comment on the overall lower enrollment in the remote arm of the study.
You want to start, Megan, or shall I?
Yeah, go ahead, Mira, and I'll fill in if I have to. Go ahead.
Yeah, so indeed, there's a very clear difference in sample size, right? I think we can start with saying that we would have liked to have more participants in all of the arms. I think there were a combination of factors here that influenced the participation in the different arms. Overall, we saw that it is quite hard to explain a methodological trial to sites and to participants. And we also got that feedback from sites that they were interested to participate, but in the end that they found it very, very hard to explain to participants why to participate, how to participate. So I think that's an important learning for us. I think the additional issues in the remote arm were that we went with a model where we went with one site per country, because in principle, one site can include participants from all over the country, right? But that does mean that if there's any challenges at that site, you don't have any recruitment in that country, and that's what happened partly. And I think a third one is that people were switching from one IMP to the other at start of the from one medication to the IMP at start of the trial, and we found out that most people were actually already on that medication. So the population that we were looking for was really, really small. So we amended the inclusion criteria at a certain point, and that led to higher inclusion. But given that this is a trial within a project, we cannot indefinitely continue to recruit participants. Those were some of the elements. Megan, if you want to add to that.
No, I think the only thing to add was that we had a considerable learning in the remote arm in terms of how did we do social advertising, social listening, some of the vendor challenges that we had around remote recruitment, which was very much learning, and we can build off in the future. So although the numbers were low, I think the learnings were extensive in the study. Sure.
Good, thank you guys so much. So we have a second question about treatment adherence and why did we sum the hybrid and remote groups together? And I guess the second part of that question is, were the eligibility criteria comparable? I guess, I mean, yeah, feel free to jump in. Amos.
Shall I take it, Kim?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. No, thank you for the question. I think that's important, an important question. So first, important to mention that the eligibility criteria across the arms were the same. But for this analysis, we really try to focus to analyze it based on decentralized trial element and not necessarily on stratify it per arms. Also because participant numbers in the remote arm were relatively low. So that is the reason we grouped the hybrid and remote arm, and they both recorded the treatment adherence data in the same way. So using a smart cap as well as manual data entry in the study app. So that was the reason that we grouped them together. Yeah.
Thank you. And then there was a sort of a second part to this around AE reporting, where 93 investigators reported versus 20 self-reported. Mm-hmm. Do you have any insight into the difference there?
Yeah, so we are also making a table where we see indeed in what domains do we find these AEs, and it's difficult to see a pattern there. So I, of course, showed the severity level or the severity score that was attached to that. Also quite complex to see a pattern there. But what I think is important to mention is that this self-reporting apparently complements also investigator-reported AEs, because in the remote and hybrid arms, we still see that investigators report also AEs. So it should not be, I think, a strategy to only use self-reporting AEs, but use it really as a complementary strategy to more conventional approaches here, because it could reduce it, but indeed we also capture additional AEs when we use investigator-reported AEs in the CRF. Thanks.
Yeah. So maybe a question. I don't know if Sten, this is good for you, but there's a question around the technology components of DCT. Did we have any insights where home nursing was used? I guess that's not exactly a tech question. So I'll open it up to others to answer as well. But were there any findings around the home nursing components of RADIAL?
Yeah, I mean, I can only say, like I had on the slide, that regarding the DCT element, home nursing, which is of course popular in literature as one of these elements, that I would not know that we use their technology to realize this element. I had this also on the second slide, I would say. Maybe someone else has another perspective.
I think maybe just to add, Sten, there was clearly a need for us to have home nurses in the hybrid arm well trained. We saw that where they didn't have hands-on experience of maybe some of the processes that we were trying to manage, or recognizing where we were doing drop off of lab samples, etc., that we did have some confusion with home nurses probably not able to support the patient as well as we had hoped, through no fault of their own. So definitely a need in terms of learning to make sure that your home nurse team is fully cognizant of the process, but also maybe the hands-on experience of some of the tech that we're managing within the study.
Yeah, good point. Possibly also maybe for future DCTs to provide them as a other stakeholder group, so to say, technology app, for example, to guide them through the processes they are not used to. But this we didn't do in RADIAL.
Yeah, and I think another insight was that some sites were really comfortable to work with an external home nurse provider, whereas others were really keen on working with their own home nurses, and they had that set up. So we allowed for that flexibility, and I think that was important. And maybe also good if you have a home nurse, you have an external home nurse, you have more parties to make sure that the processes of how data is shared between which partners is really well defined. So quite some learnings there as well.
Great, thank you so much. So something on the privacy front, and I guess maybe I'll look to you, Sten, again to maybe start. Did we face any privacy-related issues because we distributed smartphones to any of the trial participants? Good question.
Now, of course, I mean, we took care of all the privacy matters what are also in conventional trials, meaning different user roles for using the systems, different systems involved in the trial. So I would not think of any incidents we had. Of course, I mean, when at the site people were supporting participants in using the technology. I don't know to which extent they, but there was never something that they were alone with the participants and could have a privacy breach. Yeah, don't know.
I think maybe to add to that, Kim, our biggest challenge, I think, and Mira can concur, but with privacy was actually around the home nursing processes that we put in place, and where we had to share patient addresses or for home nurse visits, etc. You have to be really robust in who's sharing what and have an escalation process that doesn't involve the nurse emailing the sponsor saying, I can't manage this process at home with the patient or etc., because they would inadvertently breach privacy with the patient that way. So definitely a need to be vigilant in the home nursing space where we're sharing data for patients.
Yeah, I would agree. And the same with the DTP, IMP shipments, where also addresses needed to be shared between, for example, central pharmacy and courier, but not sponsors. So again, that was really important. So I would agree that more of the challenges were rather more there, I think, than with the technology. I think the only thing with technology that we sometimes had is that people already that they connected their own technology, and then there were data sent.
Yeah, that was one case.
Yeah, there's one case. Yeah, so that's something to think about.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, so maybe I'll ask the last question around digital literacy. So I don't know if there were any specific challenges for execution of the study or patient engagement where you saw challenges with digital literacy, and were there any mitigations that were put in place for those challenges?
I think, like I have also tried to bring over, I think digital literacy was an issue to some extent, meaning especially, of course, for participants which are not so used to use different technologies, apps, and so on. We did not took specific measures on it or precautions, let's say, in the design, because of course we relied on already developed or third-party products. I think we try to tackle it by providing, first of all, information on our knowledge base, videos to show these things, and of course, the strong involvement of sites, where I could also say that, of course, like we have spoken today already, that we could also improve there to prepare the sites better with the technology we use, software and hardware-wise, because I think some did not even see the technology before So these could have been probably better to really involve all the stakeholders in advance before the study with testing technology and software as well as hardware to provide better support.
As was also the request from the sites from the in-depth interviews, right?
Sure.
That they could have that technology and a test patient to work with it themselves so that they could better explain it. I realize that we're running over time, but we haven't answered all the questions yet, right? So I would suggest that we try and answer the other questions and share them with the participants together with the recording of the webinar and the slides that we are able to share, because we will share the slides. That's one of the questions as well, as not some of the preliminary data, but the others definitely.
That sounds perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks everyone. Thank you to the speakers and to the panelists. Thanks everyone for attending today and for all of your great questions. And we'll try to get these followed up after the session. Thanks again. Talk to you soon.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye everyone.